Perfect. Kia ora koutou, haere mai. Ka mihi atu au ki te mana whenua o tēnei wahi, ki te mana moana o tēnei wahi. No Italy ahau, ko Giacomo Kalefi tuku ingoa, kei te whanganui a tāra tuku kainga. Haere mai, tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks for coming. It's this fourth session of sort of information sharing about our project, our offshore wind project in the South Taranaki Bight. So previous sessions we talked about a bit of an overview of offshore wind, what offshore wind is, a bit of a new technology for the country, so always good to go over the fundamentals. We had a session over environmental aspects, some of the environmental things that we'll have to consider about a project like this. Had a session on job opportunities, future job opportunities. And tonight we're talking about community benefits and also the role of iwi and the conversations that we would like to have with iwi going ahead. We have a couple of special guests for the night, so very exciting. The partnership, Taranaki Offshore Partnership, is the joint venture of Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, a Danish company that I represent, big developer of offshore wind projects all over the world, but it has a strong local component, which is the New Zealand Super Fund. And rather than me trying to explain what the Super Fund does, we have Terina Williams, who will talk a little bit about the Super Fund, which is a pretty amazing institution for Aotearoa. So I might pass on to Terina. And I will be the slides person.
Thank you.
There you go.
Kia ora, Giacomo. I'm going to hold Giacomo to it. He said a little presentation from Terina on behalf of the Super Fund. But I te tuatahi, mihi atu ki te atua. Nāna I homoe ngā mea katoa, I tuku atu I tango huki. I te tuarua, I mihi atu ki ngā tinimate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. I te tuatoru, I mihi atu ki ngā mana whenua, kei kōnei. Nā koutou, ngā kaitiaki o te whenua nei, ngā koutou I mana ki tātou katoa. Ko Waio, he uri ahau no Waikato, rongo mai wāhine, Ngāti Hine hoki, ko Terina Williams tōku ingoa. So, kia ora everyone, I just wanted to mihi out to the mana whenua of this land first, and then I just wanted to say I'm Terina, I'm from Hamilton, I live in Hamilton, I work in Auckland, and I work for the New Zealand Super Fund. My official title is Senior Investment Strategist of Sustainable Investment. It's a long one, but at the Super Fund it's an important one, and I'm looking forward to explaining what that really means. Thanks, Giacomo. So, New Zealand Super Fund. We're considered a sovereign wealth fund for New Zealand, and what that means is that we invest money on behalf of the New Zealand government to help pay for the increased cost of universal pension entitlements in the future. So what that really means is the government allots us an amount of money, we take that money, we invest that money to grow that money to help pay for superannuation in future. Now the reason why this came about was because in the early 2000s, Stats NZ recognised that by the year 2050, 1 in every 4 New Zealanders would be 65 plus years of age. That meant 3 things. The first one was that there would be more people of retirement age, which meant that we'd have less people in the workforce, which meant that we'd have less taxes to help pay for our super payments when it came time for those 65 plus year olds to receive their superannuation payments. So a conversation started back in the day, like 2001, that there was a fund, we needed to do something about it. We needed to build a kitty that could help pay for these things. 2003 rolled around, a fund was established, and then ourselves, the New Zealand Super Fund, we were established to look after that fund as a type of investment company. Not company, entity. I want to be very clear about that. Because one, we're also considered an autonomous entity. That means we are separate from the government. We are accountable to the government, we give regard to their policy, but we actually operate independently from them. We have an independent board, we have our strategies, and that's important to us to make sure that the things we do aren't governed by the government of the day. So leading on from that, from this fund, what we aim to do is working towards that objective of creating this pot of wealth so that we can pay for our super payments in future. We add to Crown Wealth, improve the ability of future governments to pay for universal pensions, and I kind of touched on that. And we also ultimately reduce the tax burden on future New Zealanders. And that means that today's generation is setting themselves up to receive today's payment, and that the future generations don't have to work just to pay for our super. Bit of a circular type of money thing there. We consider ourselves to be long-term, growth oriented, and like I said, autonomous Crown entity. Why I like to note that we consider ourselves to be long-term is because to me it represents three things. One, we're patient. Two, we are not only meeting the needs of today's generations, but we also are considering future generations. And then three, what it does is, as an investor, it enables us to look into the market, find opportunities that other people aren't willing to take up because they aren't thinking about that long-term horizon. And we can take those up and we can ride those market highs and lows. That's a bit of investor type of framing. So, you know, COVID would be an example of that, where a lot of other investors would have felt the impacts of COVID, would have felt the impacts of the global financial crisis. During those times, the super fund was able to ride those highs and lows, not worry, because we saw that the decisions we were making today, we would see that we were prepared and patient to wait for the benefits that we'd receive in 25 years. That's why being a long-term investor has worked to our advantage. Growth-oriented means that we look for opportunities that we want to grow the original investment. While others are looking for opportunities, the investment's there and we're hoping they can get a return straight away. We want to grow that investment and we want to look after that investment. And the Taranaki Offshore Partnership is a great reflection of that. All of these three things, we consider them to be our advantages as investors. We call them endowments. And they just make us look more favourable to other people. People are attracted to that because we have that long-term vision. The last point I want to make about New Zealand Super Fund is that we have a mandate. And that mandate means that when we invest or when we make investment decisions, we have to do so in a manner that's consistent with best practice, that avoids undue risk, and then thirdly, that avoids prejudice to New Zealand's reputation as a responsible member of the international community. That's the long one, and it's very, very wordy, so I'm making sure I get that right. So what is best practice? Well, for ourselves, best practice includes considering environmental, social, governance factors in our investment decisions. And that's quite important to us. We have a responsible investment framework that makes sure we uphold that. And we also were one of the first financial institutions to sign up to the United Nations PRI. Those are principles for responsible investment. And so that's a reflection of how serious we take best practice. Maximise return without undue risk. Straight off the bat, when you think what are risks to investments, we think climate change. And maybe others think, like, you know, when you go and look out and you're going on holiday and you're like, man, I'd really love a beach by the sea. But then you can see that the shoreline isn't 100 metres out there, it's right outside people's front doorsteps. So when you think about it like that, we think similarly. If we're going to build, are we going to build next to shorelines that are eroding? Are we going to build on cliff tops? Are we going to invest in places that create more emissions? To us, that's a risk that we assess for. Thirdly is avoiding prejudice to New Zealand's reputation. And the best example I can give about why that's important is because we have to ask ourselves, the decisions we make today, how will they be perceived in 25 years' time? For example, we have exclusions where we don't invest in things like nuclear weapons, we don't invest in firearms, we don't invest in manufacturing tobacco. To us, those are things that aren't sustainable. Those are things that would harm our reputation on an international stage. Thanks. Oh, last one, sorry. You would have seen these figures. I actually forgot about them. Our fund size is 64.4 billion. Net contributions, so that's after costs before tax, is 15.7. meaning the money that we receive from government, and the value added. This is probably an important one, 15.6 billion to us. Now what does that mean? It means if we had left it to an everyday type of normal investment plan and normal investment strategy, that figure would be $15.6 billion less. But because of the work of our team, because of the way that we invest, because of how we invest, our investment strategy, we've added that much, which is a 9.53% per annum return. Hopefully that kind of clears up that part. As I said, we take sustainable investment quite seriously. Our purpose, and this is quite big, and it'll be hard done to find organisations that are willing to commit to this quite publicly, be transparent about it. But our purpose is sustainable investment delivering strong returns for all New Zealanders. So this means when we make our investment decisions, and I touched on it before, we take ESG considerations into factor. That's that environmental, that social and that governance factor. We also make sure that our investments, we understand the impact of the environment on our investments, as well as the impact of our investments on the environment. And we call that dual materiality because we want to make sure it works both ways, not just how our environment can serve us. The third one is, this puts us on a platform. It puts us on a platform to advocate for and to remove barriers to financial or sustainable investment within the industry. And that's what we're about too. Thanks, Chuck.
Yep.
To highlight, these are a few of our achievements. They were quite long, and that's not a boasting way, it was just I wanted to highlight the ones that I thought, oh yeah, top 3, here we go. So we are ranked the world's top performing sovereign wealth fund based on our 10-year returns. We're the winner of the Best of Financial Services Award for 2023 and 2022. We're the winner, Gold Standard Award for Reporting Accountability. And that to me shows we're quite open and transparent about the things we do and the investment decisions we make. In 2022, we have done these things, but the 3 that I'm really proud of is that we're a winner for climate action and top reducer closest to zero and small organisation at Toitu. And that's a New Zealand initiative. We're also the winner for Best Net Zero and Climate Action Investor. And then recognised as a Responsible Investment Association. Where did I want to go from this? The reason why I wanted to bring this up was because my manager messaged me this morning and she said to me, hope you have fun in Taranaki, hope you smash out your presentation and let them know that we're excited to invest in this space with an industry that knows what they're doing and has succeeded overseas, but more so that we're working towards a transitional shift. We're working towards this new space, this renewable energy space. So that's a snapshot of who we are, the direction of travel that we want to move in. And yes, thank you for listening.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you. Sorry.
Will you do questions at the end or?
I think we can have questions after each person, probably.
Yeah, I've got some questions.
Sure. Go ahead.
Tēnā koe, thank you so much for your presentation. Ko Eli aho, ko kuri tēnei. I just wanted to ask really quickly, to me I see you as a democratic institution, because you're a sovereign wealth fund, and like all of our taxes is kind of ultimately going into you to take care of our own individual and collective futures. So when you're making these really epic investment decisions, where is the democratic pathway? Because when I saw the announcement about this investment, I was confused on 2 things. Firstly, I was like, what's the business case? Because the extent of energy production, it only makes sense with the surplus if it's exported, but we don't have any competitive advantage when it comes to exporting energy. So I was like, how is the Sovereign Wealth Fund working to make decisions on my behalf with my input, with my money for my future, you see? So if you can talk a little bit, like you talked about your independence, it sounds like you've got governance roles, but whereas our input is the ultimate beneficial owners of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, then related to that, I really do appreciate the decision matrix that you shared with us and really applaud that you've won all those awards. The climate recognition is excellent. But to what extent is supporting New Zealand enterprises and New Zealand industries within that? Because I do love, like, you know, expertise wherever it comes from, New Zealand or otherwise, but knowing that within Aotearoa we do have really awesome expertise, I'm like, why are all these corporate entities associated with your partnership trajectories, like offshore entities? So to what extent, I guess, feeding back into the fact that you're mandated with our tax-paying dollar for us as citizens, I was like, this is a huge amount of our money that's going into this. I think it makes more sense that it's not just funneled offshore. So I guess it's also tied to the first question in terms of your democratic mandate and I guess the decision-making process on such a huge investment, where so much of our futures are going to be on the line. Because I think it does just come to that business case, and I'm looking at it and I'm just like I don't see it personally. But perhaps the foundational question is, like, where's the pathway in terms of your tie to the democratic mandate that governs you as our Sovereign Wealth Fund?
Oh, kia ora kōrua, kia ora ale, kia ora kiri. I'll leave the business case and the surplus to Giacomo, but I can answer and respond to the majority of the rest of the questions. So first off, correct. This is a fund that we are investing on behalf of New Zealanders. This is essentially New Zealanders' money. So I'm not going to try and slate it like we make that decision, this and this, because at the end of the day, this is to serve the benefit of New Zealanders. So straight off the bat, correct. In terms of the mandate or the democratic process, that does tie into this conversation here. Largely, we need this feedback. We want to understand, is this a valid business case? Is the community on board with this? Because as much as we might crunch numbers behind doors, as much as we might think, oh, you know, we see validity in generating offshore power, bringing it on land to New Zealand, community might not support that, and that makes that business case very difficult to go ahead. So part two, yes, this is where that democratic process plays in. This is why we've come to front this is why we come to ask feedback for the community to essentially feed into this. Part three, why are we investing offshore? Three things I just want to clarify, and I didn't cover it in my presentation, but we have two types of funds. One fund is us, and another fund is strictly for the development and improvement of New Zealand. It's strictly to invest in New Zealand. I don't want to give numbers because I don't know it off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it's like a 20-80 thing. For us and our fund within the New Zealand Super Fund, I know it's two funds, there's their fund, we're another fund. Our fund, 20% of it is held to invest in New Zealand as well, through equities, through direct assets, and the like. So that is how that's our investment strategy. Now, to make it a little bit more like, let's go a layer deeper, that investment strategy, the reason why we invest offshore is because, in short, there are a lot of opportunities offshore that are at the level that can meet our fund size. So we look at it in terms of, we essentially our end goal is to grow that kitty, to make sure there's enough funds there that our kaumātua, or our 65 plus years, are going to be looked after. And a lot of us meeting that objective or meeting that target requires us to go offshore, because there are a lot of opportunities offshore for us to look into, of the size that we are able, that we want to co-invest in. Now, that doesn't say there are opportunities here. There are opportunities here. We are investing in them, but there are much bigger opportunities offshore that will help us grow that fund, help us reach that objective.
Yep, I'll jump in. You said everything I was going to say. There's no companies in New Zealand that can build offshore wind farms. It's one of the main reasons that NZ Super is tied up in this joint venture with a Danish company. There's what we are doing, so starting from that assumption, which is just true, offshore wind is at a scale that not many New Zealand, but to be honest, not many companies worldwide can tackle. There's very few developers around the world who have actually done it. So this is a matter of, as Terina say, making sure to partner up with someone who can actually deliver a product like this. I think you were mentioning exporting the energy. This energy will land in South Taranaki and be in New Zealand. There's no export. So it's contributing to the sort of general renewable energy supply of New Zealand. And then, yeah, I guess those are the main points. One thing I didn't mention at the beginning, I normally start with that, but I forgot, is we are years away from agreeing that this project should go ahead. We are starting these community sessions very, very early in the piece. There's plenty of questions that we developers are still asking ourselves, and part of this project trajectory is deciding whether this is the right project for the country from a commercial point of view, but also for an acceptance point of view. So, New Zealand Super is doing what any investor would do of looking at an opportunity and figuring out if it's the right one. Same as CIP, so my company, and I guess we're doing it in a sort of journey 50-50 together. But that's the idea. We haven't agreed that this thing will be built. We haven't agreed that New Zealand is the right place to do it. We haven't agreed that this is the right time to try and do it. But for big returns, which projects like this can deliver, and it's quite proven in Europe, for example, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked and answered. So I think NZ Super are doing the sort of standard due diligence that a pretty clever investor would do. Yeah, hopefully that gives a bit the feel for where we're coming from. So we don't have the final answer yet, but we're asking the questions. And the outcome can be, will be certainly renewable energy for New Zealand. The way we're also trying to do it is to maximize the local content as much as possible, because if we do nothing, and this is a session that we had a month ago about job opportunities, if we don't talk about the types of jobs that could come with this type of development, if we don't start talking about training people and all that, then in 10 years' time, when we potentially are building this, all the content will be from overseas. All the workers will have to come from Europe, and that's not the way to promote the sort of growth of New Zealand. So there's a lot of work that we can do to set that up, and then there will be some components that just have to come from overseas, like blades and things like that. That's just very few countries can build those. So hopefully that gives you a feel for where we're coming. Any other questions? Anna, did you want to add anything?
Thanks.
Cool.
You sort of say that you're going to ascertain from the community whether there's support for this or not. You have a few meetings like this, but how do you actually go about really finding out whether the community in general are in support of these sorts of projects or not?
We have the years ahead are pretty much dedicated to that, to reaching out here. I was in Pattaya, thanks to amazing Jack, a couple of weeks ago. So we're trying to just be out there as much as possible, to talk about the project, because a lot of people still don't know what offshore wind is, and I think a good place to start would just be to talk about the technology and what it means to have an offshore wind farm off the coast. The idea is that, again, it becomes a pretty long but hopefully comprehensive journey where we discuss what it is, what are the benefits, what are the impacts, and then, again, as a collective, we kind of agree whether this is a good idea or not. It will take time. But the thing is, again, we are here years ahead of any big decision being made. So we are, we're targeting at the moment the one of the big milestones for us is called final investment decision. Is basically when we have all the evidence that we feel we need as investors to actually press go on building this. We're targeting 2030 for that. So we have a bit of time to kind of, again, build all this package of information, which includes environmental, social, all those aspects. So you will hear from us quite a bit.
You say you had a meeting in Padia, but I'm here representing the sort of Padia Boat Club, but we've had nobody sort of contact us to sort of say that, you know, that they want to kind of have a yap with us, and yet we're the people that probably use that that area out there more than anybody else will.
Well, we're not hoping, well, we would hope to get everybody at the first go, but we'll keep trying. I think it was on the Patia Facebook page.
It's been publicly advertised.
Community.
It's been publicly advertised.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all that they're required to do. Publicly advertised on the local media.
But again, it wasn't the last meeting in Patia. There will be plenty. We're hoping over time to figure out how to speak to everybody. Unfortunately, we won't get it right straight away with everybody.
Some people miss, you know, you miss those adverts and things like that because we don't see them. But
sure. If you'd like to leave your name on the guest book later, we'll get in touch. Great. Shall we move on to the next session? Next guest star of the evening. Back in, was it June? I think? Yeah. New Zealand Trade and Enterprise organised a study tour, is that the official title? Of Offshore Wind, where several representatives of iwi of Taranaki, Waikato, and the South Island as well. Yeah, were invited to basically travel over to Europe and see for themselves what offshore wind is. Obviously, we've always recognized the importance of mana whenua, mana moana on this. These projects again are big. They involve communities in a big way, and iwi certainly are top priority there. So we're lucky to have Harehoka Wano tonight to talk a bit about this tour and give a view of what the learning might have been.
Tēnā koutou whānau. I'm going to invite Naomi up with me because she came on the tour too. But listen, tēnā tātou. It's good to be back in Hawera and see some familiar friends, John. When I went to school in Hawera High, I was Craig. So and we had other names, Oti. And because for lots of reasons, but I chose not to use my tribal name. But here I come back as in my role with Taranaki iwi. I was born and raised in Hawera, and had a really good upbringing down here, and it's good to come back. Not representing Ngāti Rōnui. I've had a talk with my Ngāti Rōnui relations and they said it's all good. But Naomi, can introduce yourself.
Cool. Kia ora. Ko Naomi Puki Tapawait tōku ingoa. I was born in Stratford, raised in Eltham. My family are from Okaiawa, Hawera. Yes, and I joined whare on this tour with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and turned up before and said you're speaking, so here I am.
Yeah, I gave her 2 minutes warning, so it's in Māoridom that's heaps. So can we just go to the next slide and you get a sense? Look, while Trade and Enterprise organised the tour, those of us that travelled, we paid our travel and our a lot of our expenses because we wanted to go over a sort of independently of the developers, and Yakamai's got some opportunities there as well, but we wanted to just keep it because what's happened with when the developers have been coming into town around this offshore wind opportunity in South Taranaki, they've been coming at us going, we need to have a relationship with you, and we're going, well, we don't really know anything about offshore wind. It's sort of we know about tāwhiri mātea. We know what, we know, and in fact I'm a surfer, so I know all about tāwhiri mātea, but offshore wind, we know there's been we've had the whole experience of seabed mining and all of those sorts of things come into play. So this tour, we got to visit a few bars, and I drank a bit of whiskey now and then, but that's all good. But it was really to understand what does offshore wind mean, and we were interested in the environment impacts. So this is the crew that travelled. As a big group of us went from Taranaki. So Ngā Rauru and Ruahine and Taranaki Iwi, who I work for. I'm a member of Taranaki Iwi. And we joined forces with Tainui, Waikato Tainui. Manaki came with us. So she was pretty cool. And Ngāti Whātua, because those are also areas that they're looking at offshore wind opportunities. So what does that mean for us as tribal communities? And of course the NZTE, which they organised the program, and they put together a pretty good program. So can you remember that night, Naomi? What did you get up to afterwards?
I was on Uncle Watch.
So she went out night clubbing and looked after the uncles. But look, Phil Goff is the High Commissioner over there, so he's looking a lot better after he finished his last job as Mayor of Auckland. I don't think he's missing that at all. But it was good to have those sorts of networks and interests. So this was purely a study tour. Honestly, okay. You can talk about that one.
Cool. So our first company that we went and visited was Sea Green, and they were based in Montrose off the coast of Scotland. So we took a train up to Scotland the next morning, went and visited their site. They were 112 of 114 turbines built, so they were almost at the end of their building that farm off the coast there. They had the deepest jacket installations in the world at 65 metres water depth, so there's a few different ways that these turbines can be situated in the seabed, and the jacket is this kind of large yellow structure that goes up, a bit like a pyramid with a flat top. And so they need those because otherwise they'd be too deep for the turbines to be kind of monopiled into the ground. And that farm generates up to 1,075 megawatts of energy, so 1.6 million homes. So that was our first tour going out, and we actually saw this boat in operation, the jack-up rig. So the boat goes out, the kind of raises itself out of the water, and then they use a crane to set the turbines up. That was our first one. I got horribly seasick. That's my memory of it.
Look, just we got to meet some of the local community, those ones that are just interested in in terms of the local boat club, because it was a fisherman that had sort of moved into this sort of work, and he took us out, so we got to meet some of the locals, and we were asking about what were local benefits for this, apart from the social side, the work. There's going to be work available, and that's obvious. But is there anything deeper? The interesting thing about this energy, it got sucked back up into the main group, the big grid. And not so much local priority, and that's the sorts of things we want to think about as local tribal communities, but just as the community. What is the benefits going to be for us? Are we going to get a bit of a subsidy around some of our energy costs and all of that sort of stuff? So that's the discussions I think we should be having as local communities. Was there a slide before that? Can you just go back?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yes. This was just I wanted to just whip you through that one. So that's what the purpose was just for us to understand what this is all about. Because we've had there's probably 5 or 6 developers in town, and they're banging on our door, and we're sort of going, okay, what's what can we offer? Well, so we needed to go away and understand that. And for iwi and hapu, when you think of oil and gas, there wasn't much value add for us in that industry. And apart from work, some of our people had work, but we weren't structured in that way in the 1950s, 60s, where we're PSG now, we're settled iwi, and we've got some resource, and we want to be part of the game and provide opportunity for our communities, our local communities. So this is the opportunity. 11 days we were on shore, we were on land. It was a pretty fast and furious tour. 11 days travelling across the UK, Belgium and Germany. And so we saw 2 operating farms. Naomi's just talked about the first one off the Scottish coastline. We attended this pretty crazy renewable, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We visited the port for Germany's one of the most important ports. So that's got Pathia is their opportunity there in terms of repurposing that. And there's also for North Taranaki up in New Plymouth around the port up there. There's interest up there in how that can be worked. Okay, so that was the trip. You can go through. Yep. We've done that one.
Park Wind, this was Belgium a couple of days later. This was a huge offshore wind farm where we went out there, and they have, they're different companies with their different plots within the wider farm. So this many turbines might be owned by this company, and so on and so on. It was 50 k's off the Ostend coast. Am I thinking of the wrong place? 56 turbines.
Yeah, in that farm. But
in the farm.
The whole farm there were 900 turbines.
Yeah, 900.
But the guys that we worked with.
Yeah, and they were monopile foundations and water depths 15 to 37 metres. What I found on this farm that, I went in kind of thinking that we were going to see birds getting chopped up in the air and it was going to blow my eardrums, but I've got a recording on my phone that I can get, which was right underneath them. Just filming, you can hear people talking louder than you can the turbines, and that was kind of amazing to me because I really thought that they were going to be super noisy. But just the massive scale of it was like nothing you've ever seen before. It was equally terrifying and fascinating.
So taniwha, they just look like big taniwhas. There's 900 of them. It's like a city. 50 k's offshore. It was a bigger boat, so it was a better trip, as you know, on a bigger boat. But they pulled right up to the turbines, right up to the base, pulled the boat up so we could sort of get a sense. And then there's a whole lot of substations within those big farm where all the energy gets sucked into, and then the pipelines that take it back on shore and all of that sort of stuff. For our Māori soul, they pulled up. They pulled the boat up to the substation, and then they popped down and pulled all these little Belgian mussels off the base of the turbine, and then they put them in the microwave in 10 seconds or something, and we were sucking on these other little things, but their way to get to us, it got us just like that. So because it brought into the whole environmental stuff, we were interested on the impacts on mammal and seabird life, and all of that sort of stuff is of interest to us, and all of us. And those are the sorts of things we wanted to understand. So the noise was, as Naomi talked it too. So just getting a sense of what these big beasts look like out in the ocean.
So how do you get on with shipping navigation and things like that? Is there any issues?
Sorry?
Shipping navigation, big ships going through and things like that. You're talking 900 turbines.
Yeah, well, no, they're right out of those ship lanes. Yeah. And the port takes significant boats. So the placement of these is going to be really important, as it is for us.
Even saying that, in some cases, shipping lanes can be designed as part of the wind farm. Like if there's a really important shipping lane going through, the wind farm can be sort of either side and have a corridor. That would be a way to.
The one we went to in off the Scottish coastline, for us to travel out to the actual site, we had to work where the boat went around a fishing ground, so that it didn't have impact on the fishing ground. So that's the route that it uses all the time, because it's quite there's still fishing. That's really important to that community up there. So they'll have to work all of that out. Yeah.
Sorry, you go. How old are those plants there? Those wind turbines. How old are they?
So you're talking the life? You want to dive into that sort of stuff?
I think this wind farm has been there for 5 years, something like that, and it normally they're designed to be 25-30 years of design life. Yeah. So that's the type of time I would stay there. And the other one that Naomi was talking about, Sea Green. Yeah, that's new out.
Yeah, well, we as Naomi said, we watched them. They installed 2 in one day. in terms of installing them, and that's the depth. 65 metres is as deep as you can go, but you know, there's the lifespan of a turbine is 25 to 30 years.
My question was, did you see any other types of boats out there? I know it's like 50 kilometres off the coast. Was it just like the SIP guys?
No, it's a port that had other boats. We didn't see a lot coming through when we were there, but it's a port that has a lot of wind farm activity offshore in terms of that big site, but there's other things happening too.
Even just the...
Did you get an idea of what it was like fishing, or...?
Was it in Cuxhaven?
There was seals, there was kind of all sorts of marine life, because as we're going out, different bird species that were either flying around us or on their own or in the water. But you could just look out and you'd see kind of like a brown back diving through the waves either side. But the port of Montrose, as you're going out, I hadn't really seen anything like it. It was like really, really old brick buildings that were tiny little houses for the fishing families that were just stacked all the way right up until you basically got out, which was amazing to see, you know, how other communities around the world live. And for Belgium, the Parkwind, that when we visited their site, they were, before they built up, hello Kuri, this is my friend, the area that the port was based in was previously derelict. There was nothing there. It was kind of an area where refugees came through. It was known to be a bit rough. And through the wind farm that built up, you know, there's manufacturers all through there. Prior to the wind farms, the seabed there was basically still had the trawl marks in it from being over trawled. There was nothing left in there. It was all dead basically. But gradually the marine species did come back because of the mussels that grew on the base of the turbines. So that was another thing that was just out of interest.
Yeah, maybe just worth saying, normally in offshore wind farms, like recreational fishing is still allowed, so the smaller vessels can go in. Trawling is the kind of thing that doesn't work too well with offshore wind farms because of the impact on the seabed and the fact that we have the cables connecting the turbines on the seabed, and you don't want to snap onto those.
So what about anchoring?
Anchoring would be limited, or would have some cautionary. There had to be some. The turbines are a couple of kilometers apart, so there will be quite wide areas where it's safe. I think it would be similar to the gas pipeline that runs from the Coupe platform at the moment. So obviously at the moment you have to be aware of that. It would be a similar situation.
I think you'd be far enough up offshore for most guys not to be too worried about it, but the main one would be how many lines are we going to have running from the site to the shore?
Yeah.
Because it's mainly our internal shoreline that we would, in shallow areas that we would fish.
Yeah.
But, you know, if that's sort of lying on the surface, how many lanes are we going to have?
Yeah, sure.
To contend with?
It's one of the things that we're trying to coordinate early on with other developers. So if there's multiple offshore wind farms, there's only a sort of corridor where all the cable converge before they go to land. Yeah. So it might become something similar to the Coupe pipeline. Just one corridor where people have to be aware that there's something there.
But they are talking within the 12 nautical mile boundary.
That's a different developer.
But that's my point. It is going to be, keep going.
We're here talking about our project, which has always been expected to be, well, we're looking at only
outside. But you kind of do have to speak on behalf of the industry, because what you're speaking to is a level of infrastructure investment that you're across the whole suite of the other entities going forward, whether you want to or not. Like, especially if you're thinking of mana whenua or mana moana, because as soon as you hit that 12 nautical mile, you're heading on our marine and coastal land. You see, and whether you think you're linked in with these 5 other entities or not, you're still on the hook for us as mana moana and mana whenua.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'm happy to take the part of the heat for other developers. We're the only ones who are out here talking about this stuff so early, and others have decided are trying to do it in a different way. We cannot speak about why they're doing it that way.
But the power that I'm speaking to for someone like you is, if you're going to stay right here, right now, our corporate entity does not support within the 12 nautical mile, and that's useful to hear.
Yeah, Yeah, and that's what we're saying. I mean, we never looked at within the 12 nautical miles for that. We think that there's, the marine mammal sanctuary visual impacts would be much more severe being within the 12 nautical miles, so we've always looked outside the 12 nautical miles. And to be honest, we're talking about 6 developers, 5 are pretty much in agreement on that, and there's another developer that is proposing things differently.
Which one's that?
I wasn't going to make that name, but someone is, so off the hook.
Yeah, look, and we'll play that. We'll play a part in that role too. You know, I mean, we don't want that either. So let's keep going.
So I've got a question just regarding, you mentioned the lifespan of the turbines, 25 to 30 odd years. Like, what happens after that fact? Do you like get rid of them, like take them, recycle them, and then reinstall new ones, or like, what happens to that?
Cool.
Shall we maybe have an offshore wind or all these questions on the offshore wind project at the end of my... Because those are the questions that we were asking too, and I think they're with. Let's just get into it. Yeah, all good. At the end, there can be. We will be asked to prepare a full decommissioning plan, which explains how we're going to remove everything basically. We need to build up funding to do that throughout the life of the project. So we will be building it.
Stuff be done before the project even starts.
Say again, sorry.
Sorting out the funding for dismantling and etc. Will that be done before the project even started?
It's one of the big questions that we are trying to sort out with MB, whether we should be putting that whole pot of money, which is a big pot of money, in before the project starts. That can kill a project though. So the project might not start. So what we're suggesting is maybe it's a better way to do it, to have an initial amount and then we contribute to that fund as the life of the project goes ahead. So that by the end there is a pot and you're not left with the TUI decommissioning.
Yeah, it's exactly, and it's a good question because we're dealing with TUI decom, as you know, in our waters, there just needs to be a decommissioning plan, just full stop, and which there hasn't been, and with some of the current sort of projects that are on in oil and gas. So how that's sort of structured. It would be good to say the big pot's going to be set aside, but it's more likely to be a sort of it just grows as the project grows, as long as there's a plan.
Yeah, probably worth saying this is still renewable energy. There's not the amount of money in these kind of things as oil and gas. So we can't be asked to put $1 billion ahead. That would just not make the project happen. But it's absolutely worthwhile having this kind of pot growing, so that by the end, if by any chance we cannot decommission, there's the money is there to do it.
We just don't want the ship sailing off and as has happened. Okay. Do you want to talk about that, or you guys moved on?
I'll just quickly add, I went to all the environmental talks at this conference and decommissioning was a huge part of it, which was this industry is moving so fast, like crazy fast, and the tech around it is moving super fast as well. So while you might develop a decommissioning plan for 30 years ahead, 30 years from now, the tech's going to be hugely, hugely different. So from how I see it, we need, if these offshore companies are coming here and wanting to have these conversations, there should be some commitment to ensuring that New Zealand has the same technology or the same knowledge as overseas partners, because we don't have that industry here. Don't inherently have access to that knowledge, so we should have opportunities for our people on the ground here to be brought up to speed around that tech, because the decommissioning is such an important part, and just way too often is it left as an afterthought.
It was a huge conference, and I just realised, one, how small we are, and two, how far we are away from the market. These developers that are here are really, it's a big risk really for them to come and even put a plan in play to look at offshore wind farms in our country. Because everything's, we're just physically so far away. So we're gonna. It taught us that we're going to need to work as a community here in Taranaki, and then nationally, and then even, dare I say it, with our Aussie cousins.
I'd just touch a bit about what you're saying there as well. I work for Octopus Energy, which is a multinational. We do a lot of software development and some retail, but the amount of money that is available for offshore wind and green renewables is just eye-watering. We're developing in Korea and Tokyo at the moment, and we've got billions of pounds and euros at our disposal to do that. So, just in the context of this, exactly what you say, we're a very small part of this equation. So, if there are people that are willing to come here and collaborate with us about this, I think we should welcome it. Like I say, the company that I work for at the moment has no interest in doing this sort of investment in New Zealand, but we're investing billions and billions up in Asia, with Singapore, Korea, Japan.
Yep. Yeah, we're developing in Vietnam, Taiwan.
Yeah.
Those markets are a little bit ahead of New Zealand and Australia. Yeah, for sure.
Look, the technology was the other thing, the expo. I mean, you guys, all you engineering type dudes would have been fascinated by the expo stands and what's happening with this technology. It was a bit out of my league. Yeah. Okay. You want to talk about the port?
Cuxport in Cuxhaven in Germany. This was a really big port that kind of helped us to understand what would be required in the terms of port development for Taranaki. So we saw their growth over the years. They kind of had to reclaim areas of land just to facilitate the transport of these manufactured parts of the different turbines. They had 6 berths with 3 more planned. 30 years of offshore wind construction work ahead. It was huge. It was also the biggest importer of European cars for the area.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so there were cars everywhere. I don't really know what else to say.
Yeah. Was it of interest in terms of the development of the port for us here in Taranaki, because we need a good, robust port system to that's part of that infrastructure really, and of course the role that potentially the pātea can play in terms of supporting the maintenance and all that sort of daily stuff. So there's lots of conversations, and the ports have been having those conversations and trying to figure that out as well. As you know, and you know, the fact that Yakima and the team are sort of set up here to start instigating some of those conversations, because there's a bit of knowledge in that team that's required. But yeah, up in New Plymouth, but sort of worried on the scale and whether there's capacity there is the reality. But there's interest to explore it. So that's the PNE, the Pure New Energy, and again we met with these guys. These are sort of developers that are helping. That they helped us understand the complexities of offshore wind, and I mean for us that are really, it's not something we're familiar with, but the whole development of farms in Germany. When you think about Europe, there's just a real need for green energy. It's the population demand is huge. You've got a lot of onshore wind farms, a bit like Waipipi. They're a regular site onshore, let alone what they're having to develop offshore. But these guys were really, I found them, helpful in assessing the risk of development in Aotearoa. So they're still working out whether this is a good thing to be doing in our place because of the distance, and bringing all of that sort of technology, moving turbines, where we're going to manufacture turbines, what's how well set up is our grid, and all of those sorts of things. So Yakima sort of said 2030 in terms of when something may happen. So there's a lot of work to be done in that time.
Siemens Gamesa, Renewable Energy, they're also a shipping company, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're huge outfit that's kind of known internationally. They've been around for over 30 years, and they've developed offshore wind in 11 countries. One thing that I will say is on this trip through the UK, Belgium and Germany, just due to the nature of the places, we didn't encounter any Indigenous groups. So we couldn't really get the Indigenous perspective. This was, meeting with successful cases, but that was missing. We were, from the other side of the world, we were the Indigenous group engaging.
How about up in Scandinavian countries?
I wouldn't know.
Did that ever come up in the conference? Or?
There was one talk in the conference to do with development off of Brazil, but by the time I got there to that, it wasn't actually about the Indigenous people. It was about rehabbing a bird population that was affected by the turbines, and that was really cool to see. But I was kind of like, awesome for the birds, but what do the Indigenous people think of this? Yes, so Siemens Gamesa was just kind of checking out their site and seeing. No, they came to talk to us, didn't they? They came to talk to us, and for them, the thing that blew me away was just how big their portfolios are. It's not just offshore wind; it was huge. Offshore wind was just one part of it.
They are one of the two largest developers of wind turbines. So the companies that actually build the wind turbine. So them and Vestas are the two main for offshore wind.
So they got into the detail around recycling the blades and those sorts of things too. So that was of interest. But I learned a lot of. I understood a lot of what I don't know about this industry, and you guys that are either have been in oil and gas or you're into manufacture, you'll some of this stuff would have been real interest. It gave us a sense of the enormity. We're always going to come in with a bit of an Indigenous eye on things, and it's not just about the environment, it's the social stuff, it's the social opportunity and license, and then and we're also, when I think about, and this is, I'm going off script a bit here, but when we think about the 8 iwi being settled, or each having commercial, we've all got our own commercial companies, and we're investing jointly in a whole lot of things. There's opportunities for us to invest in these sorts of, if it ticks some of the things that even you spoke to, Tarina, and again, the question about we're, a lot of times tribally we're a lot of our investment portfolio is out of our tribal regions because there isn't that opportunity internally. So we just have to, all those things come into play. So it's the environment impacts, it's the social opportunities around work, things like work, and then it's the commercial opportunities. But we, as part of the Taranaki wide community, we want to be in these conversations together, and that's probably the main thing. Have we got anything else there? So here's our key findings. There you go.
Port physical transmission networks and local supply chains, strategic government and industry investment is essential. So it's huge, and we're so far away from everything that it would require, a lot of investment to get it here. Regulatory framework and permitting processes and environmental impacts and mitigations. We're not starting from scratch. We have a lot to learn from the Europe and UK. It was done differently in different areas, but there's certainly some kind of processes that are out there that have worked and some that haven't worked, so we can learn from what's happening overseas. People capacity and capability. To maximise this opportunity, there will be a need to develop and implement an appropriate people development strategy nationwide, whether that's, this is just me repurposing oil and gas. Workers, developer requirements before investing in a new offshore wind market. A significant amount of work will be required to make Aotearoa attractive to developers. But I will add, if we've got 7 years before the hits go, from my standpoint and what I'm passionate about, we need 7 years of bird migration patterns, feasibility done. We need 7 years of marine mammals, where they're going, and I'm very glad to hear that because it sounded like we were on the back foot. So while there's, requirements to make Aotearoa attractive to developers, we also need the developers to be attractive to us as well.
This one was interesting. I went to a couple of the workshops around the workforce in Europe, and there's a huge shortage over there in terms of the workforce that's required, and it speaks to, you know, how do we prepare our people locally for opportunities. You know, the conversations we have with our polytechs and industry and all of that. So that's really important.
At the conference, they had it came up a few times, just the desperate need for people. I think by 2030 they'd predicted that they were going to be in a deficit of 250,000 workers, and it was so, you know, dire that they're starting to put it in the primary school curriculum in the UK, so that offshore wind and renewable energy is kind of embedded within the education system, so that when those kids graduate, they're kind of going to funnel them straight into those jobs.
Just speaking to that people capability in Aotearoa, it's in the electricity and renewables industry, it's a conversation we're having right now, because with decarbonisation we're expecting basically the industry to double in size. And we've got an ageing workforce, like me, and there aren't people coming along underneath us. So it's a very active conversation we're having, and in terms of like Iwi and Pacifica involvement and stuff, we know we've got a population bulge coming through of young people that we could engage potentially in that industry, but the industry's got to change in the way we do our quals, the qualifications, the way that we engage with people in terms of industry training, how we actually run our companies and stuff. So it's all part of this, and there's very interesting korero starting early next year, sort of sponsored by Ryan, some other groups around that, to actually have a look at what are things that we can do, because the time frame is very similar to this, regardless of whether this project goes up or not. There's renewables coming on stream right now, and we've got issues like running out, increasing grid capacity, all sorts of things. You know, I've got colleagues that are deferring retirement just because of the need and the lack of capacity in the industry at the moment.
Yeah, that's why we developed this industry capability mapping study over the last year, to look at what offshore wind job opportunities normally come with an offshore wind industry, and the other half was what skills are actually present in Taranaki already, because we can start doing that sort of overlap of you know, that these are jobs that could actually happen, and where are the skill gaps, and how do we fill them. It's not an easy solution, but we developed this offshore wind jobs guide, which gives an idea of some of the types of jobs with some of the types of qualifications, and again the idea is to figure out what's missing and how do we move in the next few years to fill those gaps.
I have a general question about those types of jobs, because last session it was a lot of administration type jobs, and most of it was administration type, and then you've got all the ground person, fixing, maintenance, that type of thing. Is it the administration ones that's we're lacking, or is it the ground person ones? Because I thought they'd be kind of transferable from electrician or other types of skills that we've got not a lot of increasing, but we've got those ones. Is it?
Yeah. So some electrician's job, for example, an electrician who works on an onshore wind turbine probably has 80% of the tools to work offshore. What's missing is the safety stuff that allows you to do that and be hanging off a blade in the middle of the ocean. Yeah, there's some pretty rigorous safety training for that kind of stuff. And those are the kind of programs which would be fairly easy to set up. New Plymouth has quite a comprehensive marine safety program. It would just need to be tailored to offshore wind. So again, those are the kind of opportunities that we're trying to find, so that we can start preparing, people for the types of jobs.
One of the other issues in the industry is we're not very clever at making skills transferable. So we tend within our own networks and stuff to qualify people and then if they want to go and work on another network, they have to go and sit on another training class and stuff. It's those kind of things that really need to be smoothed out, because it makes that use of the workforce, it makes it frustrating for people, and they have to go and do the same stuff again.
And that's where we're hoping that this luxury of time that we have might help, because same as for the environmental programs, having a lot of time to actually look at things properly. It's similar with this training. It's not going to be resolved tomorrow. There are some big questions around when should that training happen, because again we're talking about a project that if it gets built in 10 years time. So do we train people tomorrow and then they have to wait for 8 years? Do we train them and send them offshore because they need it and they learn and then come back? These are all valid questions, but they require quite a bit of thinking. So we're trying to make sure that we coordinate with Ministry of Education, Ministry of Social Development, and we come up with, that's the idea for next year, a little bit of an initial strategy of what that could look like. Recognizing where our role as offshore wind developer stops, also means that we're trying to facilitate and initiate as much as we can, but we're not training providers, but someone else will have to pick up the tab eventually.
Team, I think we've done our bit.
One more question about, Jack, and it might be for you even.
Sure.
Like an investment, like I think it's fantastic. Hopefully the iwi, local iwi will be involved and national iwi. Is there going to be opportunities for other organisations,
to invest?
To invest?
Yeah, I will touch on it soon.
Okay, that's
Session coming up.
Good, Jax.
And how many, do you represent the iwis around here, or?
Say, I'm with Taranaki iwi uncle, but I was raised here. But Naomi's with Ruahine, and who was supposed to be presenting was Renee who went on tour with us also from Ngārauru, but we're all cousins.
Oh, because to go through some of those, come around here, around the coast there, you were going through a few reserves, wouldn't you? Go and see the owners?
Of course. Look, the mana whenua, and there'll always be those conversations that need to be had, as with the kaitiaki on those waterways. So we're all in the conversation together. So, okay.
Oh.
Kapai?
They haven't those discussions.
Can I ask a question on my way there?
Yeah, sure.
When I propose, those mapping bird migration and marine mammal migration over the next 7 years, how do you balance paying for that versus this not even going ahead? Like, do you just run that loss?
Those are the tricky questions. It's all a matter of deciding how much we are ready to spend. It's normally an incremental thing.
Yeah.
But for example, there are some major sort of gates. Phase where we are trying to get those questions asked. So even like, how long should the environmental monitoring last for? If we say it needs to last for 15 years before anything happens, then we probably don't have a project. In Europe, it's 2 years normally. We're thinking that 2 years might be too little for Aotearoa because migration patterns are all that. So those are the kind of questions that we're trying to ask now. We don't quite have the answer. If the answer is 10 years of environmental monitoring, we'll have to sit down and decide whether that works in the commercials of the project. It's still a commercial project, all this. So there is a bit of a balance of how much, burden we put onto the first project. It has to be done properly, and that's part of why this is a feasibility, because again we have to put together all these things that are the absolute minimum requirements, which might be different from other countries, and then decide whether we go ahead.
It's just COP that are willing to take community feedback on whether they build or not, but the other outfits, if the regulations make it easy enough for them, they could just build without community buy-in.
Well, I can't speak for the others. We're trying to do they could. The regulation, what that developer that I didn't name but someone else did are doing, it's legal. They're following a legal pathway, which we could have followed, but we've always decided that we've developed in many countries, and we know how it works, and we know that it pays to, do things properly, set up a regulatory environment, have community engagement, because all those things otherwise just don't work out. So we never for a second thought that we would do it under existing legislation. But, everybody does their own way. So Karen, do you have a question?
The government's just called for submissions, haven't they, on enabling offshore wind?
Correct.
This is all part of that conversation that they're asking for submissions on.
Yeah, correct. Yes?
Party used to have a port and there is limited river access at times. Is it
Yep.
really feasible to think that a project of this size is going to develop something in the river down there at the port?
Not
What was the port?
Not what was being shown. What Whananaumi was showing is a so-called marshalling port. It's a large port that receives the huge components, stores them on the quayside before they get picked up by this type of vessel and installed out there. Pattaya does not have the infrastructure for that. What we are proposing to investigate for Pattaya, and we did the first studies and we've discussed it with the community a bit, is to be the operations and maintenance port. So that would be basically, if the wind farm is 37 kilometers off Pattaya, it would be fairly easy to have crew transfer vessels, which are smallish 12 people vessels going in and out of the wind farm, basically daily. That's a very efficient way of doing operations and maintenance. So it makes it very attractive to look at Pattaya for potentially that. It would require some development. There will be a few pontoons, probably a warehouse, a bit of a control center, something like that. But nothing of the scale of that construction port over there.
Are you going to present on the iwi partnership work that you're doing? Because that's the kaupapa of the session, eh?
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, iwi was that first part, and I'm going to now jump into the community benefits where we will talk about iwi some more. I cannot do this backwards. There you go. These are big projects, and as it's clear from all the conversations we're having, communities are involved significantly, and we're trying to again have this corridor as early as possible. We don't have all the answers at all, and actually this part is mainly about me listening than me telling you stuff. So I'm going to talk about some of the types of benefits or community benefits that come with these projects. But the reality is we're trying to not show up with a recipe of what we're proposing, and rather coming out and listening to what is of interest for the community, because every community is different. South Taranaki might have different interests from North Taranaki. Taranaki might have different interests from the rest of Aotearoa. So it's really a bit of an exploratory thing. Again, it's not the last time that we're going to talk about this. It's the first touch. And it's the first opportunity for me to just hear, if some of these things that have been done in other countries make sense, if we should be looking at them. A couple of considerations before we talk about that is the types of community benefits and programs that we're discussing now need to be valid for a very long time. If we're building in 10 years' time and the wind farm has 30 years of life, this stuff needs to still be around in 40 years' time. So it's sort of, we need to think in those kind of long-term scenarios. So maybe some of these benefits are not for you guys, might be for children, grandchildren, and so on. So getting getting that lens on is important. Developers, we accept, we're very, very early in the piece, we accept that we have to do a lot of the work to get a lot of this stuff started, as I was talking about with the training, for example. But it's important to understand that this eventually does become a collaborative effort. We cannot be asked to do absolutely everything and to set up a new training academy and all that kind of stuff. Or maybe yes, maybe we all agree that that's the only thing that you want us to do. But it's important, to realize that, again, we're talking about a project that, unless it makes sense financially, it won't go ahead. And so we will be discussing, some significant sort of community benefits. But again, we want to make sure that we all agree that we'll have to do this in a collaborative way with government as well. And the third point is, again, we are very, very early in the piece. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in the next few years to understand whether this project is feasible, what the environmental conditions should look like, ports, transmission. There's a lot of stuff that needs sorting out. So the project that we're discussing today might not be the same that we get to financial close with in 7 years' time. It will have been steered by all these conversations. So, it's not like you don't hear anything from us for 7 years and then we come up with a surprise. That's definitely not how we want to do it. But again, these community benefits will have to be filtered through sort of these next years of discussing things together. So there's only so much that we can commit to right now because we're so early in the piece. The thing that we do want to commit to is having this kind of conversation, engaging very early, consulting, making sure that we're hearing your aspirations and what you would like to see. And as Father was saying, maybe oil and gas hasn't always been top notch in providing and listening to communities and providing for communities. We would like to try and do it a little bit better. And this place is, a first attempt at doing that. These are just some of the type of community benefit programs that we've seen developed in other projects in other jurisdictions where we're building, and I'll just give some examples of the various types. One is certainly local jobs, training, procurement that we touched on already. There's a whole sort of sponsorships, grants, legacy initiatives, building a new park, something like that. Additional benefits, we'll talk about that. Innovative products touches onto the whole conversation around, for example, cheaper electricity prices, which is a pretty tricky conversation to have, but we'll do our best. And the community ownership and investment opportunity is another one. I'll just go briefly on all 5 of those. So local jobs. Again, we spent quite a bit of time last year developing this industry capability mapping study. There should be a few copies around. But basically the idea there was understanding, what are the energy workers that exist in Taranaki, what could they be doing in an offshore wind context? And if they're almost there but not quite there, what can we do to get them prepared for that? There can be quite a bit of sort of co-funding with regional development agencies, for example, that recognize that there's a future for the region in a specific work. So offshore wind, for example, has always been quite supported by Venture Taranaki, regional development agency. They're quite interested in seeing, giving the opportunity of a just transition away from oil and gas. So all these training programs, scholarships, this is all stuff that we're happy to look at in the coming years. And again, we're thinking that the second phase of this industry capability mapping will focus on that. So we've identified where the skills are. What could training programs look like? Is it worth sending someone across to Europe tomorrow? They come back in 2 years' time. Is that the right timing? These are sort of tricky questions that we need to workshop. There are some special considerations. Again, iwi and hapu, we had, when we were sort of towards the end of the industry capability mapping, we had a hui here in Hawara with the South Taranaki iwi. And just to talk a bit about what our findings from that study were, and the feeling was that there needs to be a bit more of a strategy dedicated to iwi to enable iwi members to participate in some of these jobs. In some cases, contractors that are iwi members might be sort of pretty small outfits, maybe 1 or 2 people. It can be difficult for them to eventually participate in a huge project like this, unless we, move early enough to maybe help them coordinate, form consortiums, stuff like that. So these are all conversations that we think are worth having. And just a case study of something like this. This is one of our projects in the US. It's the first offshore wind farm off the East Coast. They have this, they're hosting this program which offers 2 years mentorship positions for graduates to work in the offshore wind industry. So this is very much sort of tertiary education connected. But again, this is just to give an example of the types of programs that could be set up. And what should they look like? That's the kind of things that we would like community feedback from. Should it be tertiary? Should it be more trades? These are all valid questions that we will be sort of, workshopping in the coming years. In terms of sponsorships, usual sponsorship thing that big corporates do. We are sponsoring a venue at part of WOMAD this year, as we did last year. We're sponsoring the Taranaki Rescue Helicopter as well. So the moment we identified a few opportunities that seem sort of worthy of support. Some of them, like WOMAD, are traditionally supported by energy company. So far it's been fossil fuels. We quite like the idea of helping to transition that away a little bit. But the question going ahead is, we would like, again, the community to sort of suggest what the worthy initiatives are. Are we sponsoring the right stuff? Should we be sponsoring different things? Some of the examples in the education space, some scholarships. We sponsor the Taranaki Primary School Science and Engineering Fair every year. Then we go into tourism. That's an interesting space. At the beginning in Europe, there were quite a few people worried that offshore wind would be detrimental to tourism, and in many cases it has become quite a big source of actually income, because people quite like to get onto boats and go out and see the turbines. Could that be a future for South Taranaki? Potentially. So an example here could be, maybe we should look into that, or help promote a tourism industry based on something like this. In terms of additional benefits, there's I guess the presence of the project can help fund a lot of things. We've been talking for the last 6 months, I think, with Wild for Taranaki, which some of you might know. It's an NGO that sort of helps coordinate citizens' science programs, basically. So there's quite a few seabird enthusiasts out there, apparently, who spend their weekends looking at seabirds on the beach and making notes. And so it's a little bit of an environmental study. It's obviously nothing that can go necessarily on an academic paper, but we don't quite care about that. We care more about what are people in the community actually interested in looking at, and can we support that? So we're working with them quite a bit to fund some of their programs. And again, in some cases it's, for example, trapping, helping to fund some traps for Sandy Bay, just up the coast. They have a bit of a problem with cats killing the seabirds, and they were asking if we can help with some of that. So another example there is an interesting one: improved mobile phone reception. I don't know if that's an issue here in many places, but again, I guess we could put up another reception tower, something like that. So again, these are just examples of things that have been done. The idea is, over the next few years of conversations, understanding what you guys actually find useful. We're not going to put up a cell tower unless it's needed. So innovative products, this is where we can talk about discounted power bills. So it's the question that I had, I think, the most since starting with this project is, will we have cheaper electricity prices in Taranaki? The easy answer is yes, you can. The complicated answer is it's not that simple. So all the electricity that gets generated in the country goes all into the grid. It's not like because you're sitting next to a hydropower dam, you get that electricity. It just still goes in the network. And then it gets distributed to you. So in a way, we feed into the grid, and it's kind of off our hands. So the way to get cheaper electricity prices to our region would be through some kind of rebate or something like that, which is totally fine. But it's not that because we're feeding you the electricity directly that we can give you a better price. You're still going to pay the price that your retailer gets from the spot market. Very complicated. I'm thinking of having a session just on how the electricity market works, but I need to get the courage to do it because it's intense. But just to say, rebate mechanisms, that could work. I mean, one way that offshore wind projects have been supported in other countries is that there is a deal with government in some cases, or large corporates, where we sell the electricity at a specific price, a fixed price for say 20 years, and then we still sell the electricity on the spot market at whatever price the spot market is at that moment. Anytime the spot market price is above this level that we've agreed, we have to pay back, and that money goes into a pot that could become what rebates your electricity prices. That gives you a glimpse of why I don't want to talk about these things, because it's kind of complicated, but I will one day. So just to say, we're not selling you the electricity directly. So we do not set the price directly. But there are mechanisms where there can be rebates and all that kind of stuff. How those will be set up, where the rebate stops, and therefore who we're making angry just across the border because they're not getting the rebate? Those are interesting questions as well that, would have to be worked through. But there are mechanisms. There's also, aside from the energy, the cost of energy, there's also a big resilience part, which I think is becoming more obvious and important, with things like the cyclone earlier this year. We kind of take electricity for granted sometimes, and until it's not there, and not having energy is pretty nasty. So the New Zealand grid is not super resilient. It does a good job. Could be better, and so there could be some, we could be funding some programs where, for example, there is a battery built in a region, so that can provide resilience for a community if there's a big event and the lights go off. If the Maunga decides to wake up or something like that, that energy resilience will be very important for this region, making sure that you're not depending entirely on one grid connection. So those are all possibilities. Energy storage, solar, and things like that. And we're doing a bit of that in the States as well. And then community ownership. This is sort of one of the last steps. We're talking about iwi. So the conversations we've had with iwi and hapu so far, it seems like there's two main focuses. One is co-designing, all the activities. So being on the journey for deciding from an environmental perspective, how much should we work, what should we be looking at, and all that. And then the other is a more commercial side of things. These are big projects that can generate very big returns, and it makes sense to consider whether iwi should be part of it to reap those rewards eventually. So some examples that we've seen in other countries of communities getting together. So there can be co-ownership. So a community basically creates a vehicle that ends up buying a portion of the development, so basically providing equity into the project. Same thing as CIP and New Zealand Super is doing, putting money in early on, and if everything goes well, at the end you have a percentage of the returns. Simple as that. Or else there can be, that does carry a lot of risk though, especially in a project like this. We're talking about a very, very risky project. So there is a question of, for example, iwi, would the collective of iwi or Taranaki be happy to put money into something that is as risky as we are at the moment. Terina was mentioning earlier that there's this long-term, like New Zealand Super is well placed to invest in this because there is a long-term vision, because they're talking about investments that will produce returns in 20 years. They're happy with that. My company is happy with that, but not every investor is happy to wait for 20 years to get a return. So that's why offshore wind projects, which are very long to develop, often attract institutional investors like pension funds, because there's just this long-term vision that you can basically be patient and wait for the results to come in. Co-investment is a bit more, light touch than co-ownership. So there is some investment, but there is not as much, decision-making power. At the same time, the risk is also less. So it's just a matter of, like with any investment, tailoring it to what the risk appetite is. Having said that, we New Zealand Super and CIP are very open to community co-investment and co-ownership of these projects. We are looking at, for the build of this, around $5 billion project. So anyone who comes in with a certain amount of money, it requires a lot of money to be sort of a significant part of the equation. But having said that, we never thought, for example, in the case of iwi, we recognize the mana moana, so we're fairly confident that we would give a significant amount of governance, even if the money amount is not quite the same ratio. Explained badly, but you know what I mean. And there's a case study in Denmark of an offshore wind farm built in the late 90s, 20 turbines, of which 10 are basically owned by a local community as a cooperative, and it produces earlier I was reading 4% of the annual electricity consumption Copenhagen, and that cooperative has an equity stake, so at some point they put a lot of money into the project, and they have a governance role, so they decide how how the project gets managed, and they get the returns from the project. So this is happening quite a bit. It's quite common, especially in Germany. So clearly communities are seeing that, you know, these are worthy investments. And so these are all possibilities that will be open to the community. So one thing that, for example, this is sort of what I have. One thing that I wanted to get a feel on from you guys is often in some projects we've set up things like community boards, local community boards that provide a little bit of a representation. And community here can mean anything, can be South Taranaki or the whole of Taranaki or just Hawera. Would be good to hear from you. Provides a little bit of a sounding board for, you know, communication directly between us and this community board. We can hear your voices a bit more directly through them. So that could be something that, for example, that kind of to me seems like an easy action to take maybe for next year, starting to set up a bit of a representation of the community, if the community feels that that's the right thing to do at this moment. And it's easy to identify a bit of a community board. If you think that there's still, you know, work to be done to understand the project and all that, then we're happy to wait. But that's, I guess, the mind frame we're in, is we would like to find an easy, useful way to have this dialogue continuing. We will be having many more sessions like this. Next year we might even do just a reprise of the 4 sessions that we had, because all this stuff is good to keep talking about. But again, we're very open to, you know, receiving views. My email is there. My email is on the window as well. Drop your name in the guest book, and we're trying to be as present as we can with our sort of steps of the project. And again, you're hearing pretty much everything as we develop it. So we're trying to have as few secrets as possible, except some commercial stuff that we keep from other developers, not from you. Cool. Questions? And it doesn't have to be on this. There's on offshore wind in general. Some of you were not at the previous sessions, so we have a few brochures.
That Denmark case study,
yep.
If that was initiated in 1999,
yep.
They would be looking to decommission after 30 years?
I think that's actually the only one that has been decommissioned so far. They started decommissioning. Yeah, it's why we're... Has anyone seen the movie Tenet? There's a scene in one of those turbines, which got me very excited when I was at the cinema. Yeah, I think that's the only wind farm that has actually been decommissioned, or they are decommissioning it. Yeah, because not many have reached 25 or 30 years of life.
I've got a question about how long that is taking, and also how long it took the Scotland one to set up, because there was 112 when you guys went, out of 114 supposed to be up. Has that taken a long time?
Do you know?
I don't know how. Maybe, I feel like it might have been 2020 they started.
Okay.
Yeah,
but
probably.
I'll do with a Google.
Yeah, 2 years is a standard time for building an offshore wind. It will depend on the size, but yeah. The boat will not be on hire for 2 years. No, it would just be coming in for, say, a 3-month installation period. It's one of the things that will be quite interesting of the South Taranaki Bight. We have a buoy out there that is recording wind speeds and has been for a number of months. Wind speeds are amazing from a production perspective, but you know, it's putting us in the position of there's going to be not many days available for actually going out and installing. So that's the other, I guess, the downside of having a very windy site. Yep.
Yeah, so this has been really interesting for me as a member of our Hapu Taiao committee, because I think it was in January that the Super Fund did this big press release announcing that it was doing this investment in partnership with Mana Whenua, and I was like, what? Because coming from our iwi here, given that we were led by Hapu, to me I've been kind of waiting for you guys to come and connect and present with us, and I came here today thinking, like, it's amazing to me that there was no, I mean, I know you're speaking from a community perspective, but you also put iwi within the title of this. But Te Tiriti wasn't even featured in kind of that presentation just then. And I'm guessing that when the super fund did, what do you call it, like your procurement and your tender process, that there would have been a due diligence track requiring a treaty framework at a bare minimum in terms of scoping the business case and whatnot. What really gives me pause, if I was from your position, looking at the trajectory with the regs, for example. Okay, so when they released the most recent discussion paper, the MB folks had nothing with respect to doing their compliance checks, their legal obligation checks there. They just said, oh, we haven't done an assessment with mana whenua yet, we're going to leave that, wait until after the regs are done. So you already said in your presentation that you're really mindful of working closely with community because you know that it doesn't work if you race ahead. And so you've got a regulator that's already racing ahead and hasn't sussed out like the intricacies in terms of being legally compliant and the very regs that they're putting together. So me and a whole bunch of us from our Taiao committee, we were sitting there in the session with MB and we were asking them, have you even checked compliance with MACA? That's what I was asking you about, the 12 nautical mile aspect, because that's already like under litigation. So you guys are kind of like, you've got some due diligence to suss out.
With MB, I would say we've always been quite ahead of MB in terms of certainly the iwi discussion, and that's why I think.
With who though? So that's what I mean. So there's a lot of nuanced bits to put into it.
Yeah, sure.
But perhaps something. So clearly, you've given us your presentation. It's a really great overview. It speaks to a broad brush of community.
Yeah.
But because iwi was put in that kaupapa title, I was waiting to see where the due diligence suite was from your side and how. So maybe we might need to do another session.
Yep.
At the least, that could, at least show me that you've read the treaty.
Yep.
Show me that, like, how's this all going to work if you've got a regulatory framework that's got a big lacuna right there. Like, I'm speaking as an RMA lawyer. I'm speaking as someone with like PhD trajectory in climate change, working in policy on this for the government. Like, I wouldn't want to be in your position where you've got members of hapu Taiao committees from a hapu-led iwi who are sitting here and I'm just like, what? Where's the scoping? Do you know what I mean? And we're going to court in February, like for our foreshore and seabed.
Sure.
So we're right in your line of sight.
The MB.
We've not even met.
Yeah, I know. I've been trying to get to the hapu level for quite a bit. It's not always easy to find who we're supposed to speak to. So when we started our conversations, a year and a half ago now, we started with the iwi level, and then the idea was to work down with the iwi that are more hapu-centric, like Naruhine, and the ones like Ngāti Ronui, who maybe are more at an iwi level. So as you can imagine, we have there's quite a few entities that we need to speak to. The idea, and I think I mentioned it a couple of times, is always that eventually we talk to individuals, regardless of membership to hapu and iwi. But certainly the process is that MB are, they're not up to speed with a lot of that stuff. But I think part of the discussion papers is exactly that. They are basically asking questions more than they are providing answers in many respects, and iwi is certainly one of those. And so one of the things they were doing was reaching out to, I guess, anyone who wanted to comment on that, and we provided our view of the conversations that we've had so far and the lots of work that we still have ahead, and how that will be embodied in the regulations. We still don't know. Fairly sure there will be several more steps involved, from their perspective and from ours as well.
If I can add to that, just from our super fund's perspective. In terms of Te Tiriti and upholding its principles, I know that we have every intention of doing that. So from our perspective, and just building on what Giacomo said, we need to recognise that there are overlapping interests. So there are many interests that are represented in this rohe, so we want to make sure that all those voices are given a platform to. Who they are, we kind of comes into this conversation here, but what the Matua was saying over here, who are we talking to, what iwi are we talking to, which hapu are we talking to? that will come from these conversations, as well as the ones that we've already had. So, one, giving a voice in these spaces, as well as once we've identified those voices, furthering those conversations to have that kōrero. Second, how do we uphold te tiriti? Well, one of the key mechanisms that we want to eventually do, and a stepping stone or a starting stone, is time to take a CBA. We can really only undertake a cultural impact assessment once we've recognised who these hapu are, once they've given us their trust that they want us to have their mātauranga and to have it represented, and talk about what we're going to do with that mātauranga, how we're going to move forward on it, how are we going to recognise the impact on our taiao, and how we're going to say, like, this is how we've considered it in our plan. Giacomo's already alluded to it, but this is the beginning of our conversation. There are many years ahead, and we have every intention of continuing this conversation, building that relationship, and making sure that we, I mentioned it before about that dual materiality, not only what the impact the environment will have on our investment, but what impact our investment will have on the taiao, and that includes its people. So, just to reiterate the point, we're aware of te tiriti. We need to understand what settlements have happened in this area, and if there aren't settlements for some hapu, how can we represent their interests? That is part of this ongoing conversation.
Yep, thanks, Tarian. Again, it's only the beginning of the conversation, and we are hoping through these sessions to also find more people that we need to speak to. We don't claim to have found every person that needs speaking to. Again, we had to start from a point, which was the iwi, and we had a bit of a road show last year, speaking to all the iwi in South Taranaki, and including Whare. The idea is then to start going down to hapu and eventually be on marae, talking about these things. Talking about what it could look like and hearing about what we should be focusing on. We're coming with way more questions than answers, that's for sure. And my understanding is that other companies like Seabed Mining arrived with the answers, and it was too late at that point. And so we're kind of using Seabed Mining as a good manual of what not to do, I think. Yes, Karen?
Do you need a higher level too, addressing your sort of point? You talk about this working group,
yep.
But it's more than, and I totally understand that you want this relationship. But it's MB, it's Infrastructure New Zealand, it's our funding of our electricity network. It fits within that big network, doesn't it? You're a cog in that.
Yep.
But whether or not power goes to people, whether it's hydrogen or whether it's something else, there's a strategy, isn't there? There's an energy strategy that fits within.
Yep.
And in a way, and the cultural is all part of that. And you're talking about MB and so forth. It's those higher level, that the community also needs to hear from, because it does fit within that network, doesn't it? It shouldn't just be all on you, should it? If New Zealand as a whole is looking at its energy strategy and transitioning, this fits within that. So those sort of people, and your sort of question that you're just asking, don't you sit within that framework?
Yeah, I think we do. And again, we're out here setting up places like this to hear these comments that then we can relay back to MB. MB have been asking us for the last year how we're engaging with the community, because they're not really here that much. And so, are
they actually here, MB?
Sometimes. I think they have.
As a community, wouldn't we want to hear from MB?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
New Zealand,
the
Energy Network.
Yeah. But, I'm not them.
So we probably need to, as a community, ask for that to happen.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be necessary from you, should it?
I think so. And it's still a big government department, so, it might take time to get them across, but absolutely, I think they should be here a lot more than they are. But
what about if you're one of those that sees something like that and just thinks, there's some serious money making right there? So I've worked on heaps of these jack-up rigs there. I've worked on all the rigs around here.
Yep.
Like jack-up rigs and that. And there's just opportunity for like heaps of toys,
Yep.
So that's why I'm here today. I want to go suss out here, see how I get my foot in the door.
Yep.
So, but how you were saying, it's still, further up the track.
Yep.
The start of the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So being here for this is also the chance of obviously kind of putting the foot in the door first.
Yeah, sure.
Not first, but you know what I mean, trying to get them in and then staying in the loop.
Yep.
For when this does jump off.
Yep.
And, you know what I mean? So kind of get in, but also kind of train at the same time, but keep in the contact and all this about the start of it?
Yeah, sure. So in that study that we did about jobs, we tried to figure out when the jobs will happen. So the construction jobs, if we build, it will be in 10 years' time, and there will be 2 years of, a bit like oil and gas, a lot of work required for 2 years, say 2 or 3 years. Yeah, we never thought that that's not the best opportunity. I mean, it's good, but it's a bit of a boom bust kind of thing. You know, you don't want just those jobs. So we focused more on the operations and maintenance jobs, which are 30 years of, I think we calculated around 150 jobs, and those could be, 30 jobs that carry on for 30 years in a location like Sataranaki. So that's pretty significant. They're high skilled jobs, but we also don't want to lose track of the fact that there are some jobs that are happening right now. At the back there we have the amazing Jessie, who is, was hired last week and is now working in here, and she's from Hawara, and so,
Come and say hi, anytime.
Yeah. So just to say, yeah, some of these things are already happening because the project is here and requires people to make it work. So absolutely, keep foot on the door and follow the story. It will be, it's a long, slow story, and it's always been like that in every country we've developed. And it takes time. This due diligence is the thing. Like, there's a lot of questions that we need to answer. There's a lot of people who will not be happy with our answers straight away, and our job is to go away and fix the answer so that people are happy with it. And not everybody at the end of this will be 100% on board, but the idea is that we will be enough in agreement that it's a good idea to have something like this in New Zealand. That's how we're trying to present ourselves. Yes, Karen.
Naomi, you're a marine scientist, so I think there's also, obviously from a localised scale, interested. But if you think universally with acidification of the ocean, warming of the ocean, that's in a way for the moana a massive risk, right? We've got places all over New Zealand, isn't it, where we're seeing acidification and warming and what it's doing to our oceans. So if we don't transition, which is what wind is offering us, that's a holistic look, isn't it, Naomi? I mean, you know yourself what's happening in New Zealand in terms of climate change.
Yeah, I can't speak to the whether it's energy transition or whether we need to, I don't know what the term is, but localise and to just stop consuming so much. I don't know what the best output is. We've definitely, my background is in marine heat waves, so the ocean is warming massively, and especially off the coast here we've had huge marine heat waves which have affected blue whale populations. They don't have as much food. Seaweed's dying off, fish are moving. You might have your quotas, but fish don't stick to lines on the map. There's kind of all sorts of impacts, but climate change is real. It's here. It's been happening for a while. I can't say whether we need to be transitioning to renewable energy or whether we, if that's under the greenhouse gas emission different trajectories. We're aiming for. I'm not sure which one we're aiming for, but maybe it's just needs to be a change on an individual level and into consumption.
This is why I was going back to the business case, because New Zealand has one of the most renewable energy markets in the world comparatively, right? And so when that superannuation fund press release came out and was like, oh, this is going to make trillions of dollars of renewable energy, it was such a small percentage of our energy market that was yet to decarbonise. So that's why I said right at the start, whereas the business case, if we're talking about exporting, we don't have a trade advantage because you've got Australia right there with their offshore winds. Their tenders went off in March, I think, the first round. So, they're much closer to all these other markets. I think you were saying, gentlemen over here, that some other countries are not even looking at New Zealand because we don't have that export advantage. So if you're saying where's our climate change, there's lots of other trajectories we can go in the bigger picture with climate policy, but I'm still trying to understand the business case because our energy market is actually pretty good.
Yep, right now.
Yeah.
Not in 20 years' time.
But in 20 years' time, with the we can ask.
Yeah.
We'll get into the nuts and bolts details maybe.
I won't go too far into the weeds.
Yeah.
yeah, there's a bigger picture here in terms of decarbonisation and stuff that is going to drive the need for electricity. It seems almost impossible to see that vision without that actually happening. So one of the issues in New Zealand is that a lot of our renewable hydro has actually got it's very risky. So the hydro capacity is about 3 weeks. And your power price is going to go up next year because we're going into a dry winter. So it's going to be less yield from those dams. So that's one of the things that affects our market all the time. And we're going to climate change. The volumes going to those lakes is going to change. We're going to be transitioning away from, at least for our motor vehicles that we drive, maybe not transport, but transport may have to go to another solution like hydrogen, but that will need electricity to generate it.
Yeah, I actually work at the Climate Change Commission as a general manager.
Yeah. So there's all those issues building up. So we either reduce demand, which I think under the current trajectory of the system we operate in, there's a pressure on it, but it's unlikely. There's a lot of forces going out there to have business as usual, but just decarbonise it. And so that's all putting pressure on the system at the moment. We do need more renewable resources. Second problem we've got is we're used to having the dams like big batteries in the way, but we're going to a situation now where we've got to try and match up supply and demand. So that's the area I work in. We're having to use IT to kind of work that stuff out. The big one, which if we're talking about exports, somehow we're not in a weightless economy, somehow we have to move our goods overseas. And currently at the moment doing it with non-renewables. If we want to fly to other parts of the world, we're doing it with non-renewables. Solutions have to be found for all that. And that may come in the case of biofuels and stuff like that, that'll be cracked by electricity. So to where I'm sitting in the industry at the moment and looking at it and seeing all the pressures that are coming onto it, it's pretty hard to see how that is going to happen unless we start investing more in renewables at the moment. The big one that nobody's talking about really at the moment is how we export our goods and import our goods here and how we move around internationally. Because we're so far away, one of the next pressures that's going to come on is other countries are going to start effectively taxing us if we're not finding a non-renewable solution. So it's a huge and wicked problem. There's no easy answers. In some ways, like from an Indigenous perspective, from Maori perspective, where we sit as tangata whenua in the system, we're down here. This natural world is there are tupuna, and they will do what they need to do. They will do what they need to do. But we do have a responsibility to try and make some change to be good tupuna for our children, the people that go after us, and working with the environment. So yeah, it's when I look, some discussions I'm involved in at the moment, and it's kind of grim in some ways because a lot of the people I deal with don't come with a willingness to engage, like your company is.
Yep.
And I work within one of those companies. My CEO recently said we should stop demonising gas, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Seriously, what the fuck are you talking about?
But to be fair as well, we don't have that energy picture, do we? Like if you showed our needs for energy, that gas, what are we going to do to transition? We want to transition as fast as we can, but we have a set energy need, don't we? And for our industry and for our exports, there's an energy budget, isn't there?
Yeah.
So we do need gas for the transition. If you cut the gas now, we wouldn't be able to continue.
The reality is gas is expanding at the moment.
Yeah, I think the crux is on how fast we want to transition because
We just need to know why this? You know, I think we can all go and read the 2050 net zero pathways from the Climate Change Commission. That's where all this like detail. But yeah, this is what I was trying to understand a little bit more from you guys.
Yeah.
Because like I understand what you're saying, understand what you're saying. Okay, so you're pitching it. So what emission are you indeed saying we have a solution to emissions budgets 4, which is coming out next year?
We are saying if there's a projection for another 30 terawatt hours of electricity by 2050, which I think is the Transpower one. I'm not sure about the Climate Change Commission, but I have the number somewhere. That can be, if we want it through renewables, that can only be met by wind or solar and maybe a bit of geothermal. And then you're left with the question, wind, do we want it to be 6 onshore wind farm, or do we want one of these? That's kind of the game that we're playing here. We're trying to figure out that mix of future renewable energy, what should it look like?
Yeah, and then the 3 spots, because you said it's here, somewhere in Waikato,
yeah.
I'm guessing Raglan.
Yeah, a bit further north, potentially.
And the 3rd spot, so
yeah, those are the areas where it's easy to do offshore wind in New Zealand. It doesn't mean that we're going out there and building offshore wind everywhere. It might be that the future, if offshore wind happens, is one offshore wind farm. That's it in New Zealand. Will be pretty tricky to, that thing about appetite for investment in the country, getting the whole supply chain to come to New Zealand for one offshore wind farm will be tricky. But these are the kind of questions that we're asking ourselves. We don't have all these answers. We are, the business case starts like this and slowly it converges into something that makes sense. If at some point that doesn't make sense, you can believe that Superfund and CAP walk away.
Look, great discussions here, guys. It can be as grim as we allow it. But we're going to make changes, and I just want to say tribally as we sort of close this discussion down, because I feel like you're in the hot seat here, mate. We've got to make some changes. We know that, and we're looking at a strategy around alternative energies ourselves. We've got no answers. I mean, Fraser's been in my office talking about those experiences. So we've just got to get our own intel, do our own DD, our own due diligence on some of this, and the business, as you say, the business plan. Even for us, are we committed to this yet? Heck no. We're still trying to figure it out.
Yep.
But good discussion tonight. Good questions, and I'm sure that the thing about Giacomo that we've appreciated is that we've had somebody to talk to, whereas the others tend to be coming in and out and hitting us when we're not ready and all that sort of stuff. So, kia kaha, Giacomo, and we'll come back with more questions and figure a few things out ourselves, because we have to make changes as well, and just in our own homes, and we already are sort of in a way. So all brings all that into play, but good to spend an evening with you guys.
Thanks, Whare. Thanks a lot. Again, I mean, we're looking at an opportunity, right? That's simple as it is, and we're trying to figure out if it is a good opportunity, and you are part of helping us figure out if it's a good opportunity.
Are you in the other spots too, or just here?
Well, we aren't anywhere. We are in this office talking about the prospect of South Taranaki because it looks, again, very promising. And we are looking at Waikato as well because it's the second most promising. But in terms of, and when I say promising, it starts with basically 2 things. One is wind speeds and the other is water depth. And South Taranaki has shallow water and incredible wind speeds. So it's sort of easy to build this. That's where the whole thing starts. Again, there's a resource that could be used. Then there's all those cascade of questions that come after that on whether it should be used, when it should be used, what will it generate, and all that. Waikato has not so good wind, but it has a very good grid connection, transmission grid, which South Taranaki doesn't have. It's a bit balancing, but South Taranaki is by far the jewel so far, the main opportunity to look at.
Where's the tech currently with the recycling of blades?
Yeah, both Vestas and Siemens are now developing recyclable blades. Apparently, one of the last things that was missing was a way to melt the resin that keeps the fiberglass together, and now they seem to have figured that out. So it was one of the last sort of big things that was really not making the industry very sustainable, being left with all these blades that couldn't be really recycled at the end. But the industry heard that, and they're moving towards that now. So yeah, by the time we get to build, we would expect to have everything fully recyclable. And the rest of the structure is mostly steel, so it's easily recyclable.
Sorry, just wanted to share with the group, the Global Wind Energy Council has a podcast, really user-friendly for non-engineering techie people.
Okay.
But it goes through the whole world, really chatty, 2 guys, Siemens Gamesa, I think, runs it in the Global Wind Energy Council, and they talk about all the changes in technology, the funding challenges. It's quite holistic. People are interested in knowing what's happening in the world.
There's a lot happening. It's a pretty fast-moving industry because it's only been around for 20 years, after all. So, there's a lot of stuff that needs sort of learning, but I think it's an industry that has learned quite quickly, and especially has recognized from the beginning that it was trying to be a sustainable industry. So again, things like were always a bit like an eyesore in an industry that was trying to help solve things like climate change.